Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And tonight, my good friend, Dee Piers, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, uh, is joining me.
Happy to be here, Joe.
I am happy you are here, Dee.
Joe's got a lot to cover tonight.
Yeah, I got a lot to cover tonight, but should be really interesting. My camera seems to be having some sort of interference going on with it. I don't know. I can't explain that. But my sound seems all right, right?
Yes, your sound is great.
My sound is right, is great. So I don't know what the instability in the camera is being caused by, and I don't know how to fix it. So
Mm, mm.
since the sound is all right, I'm just going to go with it.
Yes.
Okay. And let's check in on who's arrived. The Earl of Laurel. Hello, Earl.
Yes, good to see you.
Good to see you. And whoever's watching now, please share, like, and subscribe. And I guess we're going to start off in the usual way by taking a minute to share this on Facebook.
Okay. Let everybody know that Joe is live
I am live.
and ready
Sure,
to go.
I am wobblingly live.
Ay, ay, ay.
Yeah, yeah, is right. Okay. So it seems to be having a little problem. I've shared this to my Facebook and it says posting, but it's still saying posting. Uh,
I don't know.
D, you still there?
I'm still here.
Good. So we have a number of topics tonight. One is Jeffrey Sachs's request that the United States close its bases in Asia, or his proposal, let's put it that way, or suggestion. Then we have a Mike Whitney article dealing with the Fatteh-1, which is an Iranian hypersonic missile and its capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And then Larry Johnson checks in,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an article from him in dealing with the peace deal in Ukraine, at least the peace deal proposal of the United States unraveling. Uh,
Okay.
he covers a few more topics also. And then we have something from Alistair Crook about juggling war and peace negotiations. Uh, and then finally, we have a striking piece from Pepe Escobar, who talks about all sorts of things, but what he's talking about, in some measure, is the art, okay, of blinking, because Trump seems to be mastering the art of blinking. Uh, okay, here's Evelina. Hello, Evelina, and hello, Steve Wolfbrand.
Hello, everybody.
It's great to see you all. Please do share, like, and subscribe. I guess you're all subscribed, but please do share, like, because it helps with the algorithm and gets us more people. I know my image is a little wobbly today. There seems to be some interference coming in. I don't know what's causing the interference. And okay, it may be my connection to the internet, but that connection is a direct connection to the internet. So don't think there's anything wrong with it. But anyway, since you can all hear me, and you can see me with some lines going through it. I'm going to keep on going. So let's get to the first piece, which is a very interesting one from Jeffrey Sachs. It also appeared in Common Dreams, but I picked it up at the Un's Review. Title of it is "Close the U.S. Military Bases, in Asia." And Jeff did this on April 22nd, 2025. It's amazing he has any time to write because he is traveling. He seems like he's been traveling for days and days and days. But I guess when you get into the routine of traveling, you learn to integrate your blog posts into that routine. This is a fairly short one. Here's a photo. Welcome to Humphreys, the Army's home in Korea. It's the U.S. Army Garrison Humphreys in South Korea. USAG Humphreys, CC by 2.0. And this has a Creative Commons license via Wikipedia, Wikimedia Commons. Anyway, beginning the article, President Donald Trump is again loudly complaining that the U.S. military bases in Asia are too costly for the U.S. to bear. Well, we know, of course, that's not true because we're a monetary sovereign. But anyway, that's what Trump thinks. So as part of the new round of tariff talks with Japan and Korea, Trump is calling on Japan and Korea to pay for stationing the U.S. troops. Jeff then says, here's a much better idea. Close the bases and return the U.S. servicemen to the United States. Well, that's putting it right on the line. Trump implies that the United States is providing a great service to Japan and Korea by stationing 50,000 troops in Japan and nearly 30,000 in Korea. Yet these countries do not need the United States to defend themselves. They are wealthy and can certainly provide their own defense. Far more importantly, diplomacy can ensure the peace in Northeast Asia far more effectively and far less expensively than U.S. troops. I think I agree with Jeff about that. Going on, the United States acts as if Japan needs to be defended against China. Let's have a look. During the past 1,000 years, during which time China was the region's dominant power for all but the last 150 years, how many times did China attempt to invade Japan? If you answered 0, you are correct. China did not attempt to invade Japan on a single occasion. You might quibble. What about the 2 attempts in 1274 and 1281, roughly 750 years ago? It's true that when the Mongols, Kublai Khan, temporarily ruled China between 1271 and 1368, the Mongols twice sent expeditionary fleets to invade Japan, and both times were defeated by a combination of typhoons, known in Japanese lore as the kamikaze winds, and by Japanese coastal defenses. I was watching a video about that the other day. It was very striking how many ships the Mongols lost, in those 2 invasion attempts of Japan. These were very major operations for the time. They were unprecedented naval forces assembled, but for invasion.
Mhm.
Uh, and the Japanese defeated them with relatively few samurai troops doing very heroic things. But anyway, Japan, on the other hand, made several attempts to attack or conquer China. In 1592, the arrogant and erratic Japanese military leader Toyotomi Hideyoshi launched an invasion of Korea with a goal of conquering Ming China. He did not get far, dying in 1598 without even having subdued Korea. In 1894 to 5, Japan invaded and defeated China in the Sino-Japanese War, taking Taiwan as a Japanese colony. And of course, the Chinese have yet to take Taiwan back. I just added that to the article. In 1931, Japan invaded northeast China, specifically Manchuria,
Mhm.
and created the Japanese colony of Manchukuo. In 1937, Japan invaded China, starting World War II, uh, World War II in the Pacific region. Nobody thinks Japan is going to invade China today, and there is no rhyme, reason, or historical precedent to believe that China is going to invade Japan. Japan has no need for the military bases of the U.S. to protect itself from China. The same is true of China and Korea. During the past 1,000 years, China never invaded Korea except on one occasion when the U.S. threatened China. China entered the war in late 1950 on the side of North Korea to fight the U.S. troops advancing northward toward the Chinese border.
Mhm.
At the time, the U.S. General um, Douglas MacArthur recklessly recommended attacking China with atomic bombs. He also proposed to support the nationalist forces of the Chinese, then based in Taiwan, to invade the uh, 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 the mainland of China. President Harry Truman, thank God, rejected MacArthur's proposals. South Korea needs deterrence against North Korea to be sure, but that would be achieved far more effectively and credibly through a regional security system, including China, Japan, North Korea, South Korea, than through the presence of the U.S., which has repeatedly stoked North Korea's nuclear arsenal and military buildup, not diminished it. I think Jeff's right about that, too. In fact, the U.S. military bases in East Asia are really for the U.S. projection of power, not for the defense of Japan or Korea. This is even more reason why they should be removed. Though the U.S. claims that its bases in East Asia are defensive, they're understandably viewed by China and North Korea as a direct threat, for example, by creating the possibility of a decapitation strike and by dangerously lowering the response times for China and North Korea to a U.S. provocation or some kind of misunderstanding. Russia vociferously opposed NATO in Ukraine for the same justifiable reasons.
Mhm.
NATO has frequently intervened in US backed regime change operations and has placed missile systems dangerously close to Russia. Indeed, just as Russia feared, NATO has actively participated in the Ukraine war, providing armament, strategy, intelligence, and even programming and tracking for missile strikes deep inside of Russia. Note that Trump is currently obsessed with two small port facilities in Panama owned by a Hong Kong company claiming that China is threatening U.S. security and wants the facility sold to an American buyer. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, 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 uh,
Mhm.
the U.S., on the other hand, surrounds China not with two tiny port facilities, but with major U.S. military bases in Japan, South Korea, Guam, the Philippines, and the Indian Ocean near to China's international uh, sea lanes. That base in the in the Indian Ocean, I believe, is the Diego Garcia base now, which is being used as a threat to Iran, and also as a base uh, uh, um, from which it's possible for the U.S. to reach the Houthis in Yemen. Going on with the article, the best strategy for the superpowers is to stay out of each other's lanes.
That's true.
China and Russia should not open any military bases in the Western Hemisphere, to put it uh, uh, um, mildly. The last time that was tried, when the Soviet Union placed nuclear weapons in Cuba in 1962, the world nearly ended in nuclear annihilation. See Martin Sherwin's remarkable book Gambling with Armageddon for the shocking details on how close the world came, to nuclear Armageddon. Neither China nor Russia shows the slightest inclination to do so today, despite all of the provocations of facing U.S. bases in their own particular neighborhoods. Trump is looking for ways to save money, an excellent idea given that the U.S. federal budget is hemorrhaging $2 trillion a year, more than 6% of U.S. GDP. Closing the U.S. Um, overseas military bases would be an excellent place to start. I have two comments on that particular paragraph. Of course, uh, okay, that is, there is no need for the United States to balance its budget uh, when it runs deficits. Okay, it really needs to do so. Okay, because there are leakages to foreign trade and to savings that take money out of the economy each year. Deficit spending is needed to close that particular gap. Okay, a budget deficit of 6% is probably not sufficiently large in the first place, because there's evidence that the savings desires of the US population are roughly 6% of GDP. And there's also evidence that uh, 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 the trading desires of the U.S. population are such uh, that we also favor a trade deficit of roughly 6% of GDP. Those,
No. Oh, sorry, Joe.
yeah, those two deficits together amount to 12% of GDP. So from that point of view, just as a macroeconomic hunch now, it appears that our deficit spending of 6% of GDP is probably 6% too low to really have a robust type of full employment economy here in the United States. Now, I agree that closing the military bases, is very desirable, but that has nothing to do with saving money. As a monetary sovereign, we do not need to save the money. We need to spend the money, however, in the right way. one of the problems with spending the money overseas on bases is that that money is spent into the local economies over there, not into the U.S. economy. Now, I know a great deal of the $2 trillion is spent on armaments and things like that, that we produce here. But I'm just talking about the expenses for maintaining the bases, okay, in Asia. Those expenses go into the local economies. So there's a leakage there. In other words, part of the $2 trillion in deficit spending um, is a leakage beyond the trade deficit. So there's that. Anyway, going on with the article. Trump even seemed to point that way at the start of his second term, but the congressional Republicans have called for increases, not decreases, in military spending. Yet, with America's 750 or so overseas military bases in around 80 countries, it's time to close these bases, pocket the savings, and return to diplomacy. No, it's not time to pocket the savings. It's time instead to use the deficit spending on something else, which is more productive um, for the United States here at home. Going on, getting the host countries to pay for something that doesn't help them or the United States is a huge drain of time, diplomacy, and resources, both for the U.S. and the host countries. I agree with that, but I think the most important thing is the negative impact it has uh, on the prospects for peace. Uh, I know that our justification for having the bases overseas is that they help our deterrence posture, but it seems like they're not simply used for deterrence, but are used to back up our attempts to do regime change in the countries, okay, of Asia. Uh, okay, those attempts, in turn, increase the probability that we'll get into World War III. And that is a more basic reason for closing down our military bases in 80 countries. Uh, anyway, going on with the article, the U.S. should make a basic deal with China, Russia, and other powers. Quote, you keep your military bases out of our neighborhood and we'll keep our military bases out of yours, unquote. Basic reciprocity among the major powers would save trillions of dollars in military outlays over the coming decade, and more importantly, would push the doomsday clock back from 89 seconds to a nuclear um, 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 Armageddon. And that's the conclusion from Jeffrey Sachs, a conclusion that I strongly agree with. This was republished actually from other news by permission of the author, okay, or the representative, not from Common Dreams. So I take that back. So, any comments, Dee?
I would have to say the key point is everyone needs to stay in its lane. You know, everybody just take care of what your needs are, your area. Stop interfering everywhere in the world, which is the USA.
Right. Uh, it's fairly clear, and we will make it increasingly clear as we go through the program tonight. It's increasingly clear the U.S. is no longer the hegemon uh, 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 of the world. There are other great powers too, and they exceed our power in the areas of the world that they are located. Obviously, the Russians are more powerful in Eastern Europe than
Mm-hmm.
we are, That's amply proved by what has happened, in the Ukraine war. Uh, Also, the Russians are at least accounted to us as far as West Asia is concerned. The Chinese are building up their power, in that area of the world. And of course, Russia and China in Central Asia, okay, and in the Far East are more than a match for the United States, uh, in those areas. So the more conflicts we have with other great powers in those other areas, the greater the likelihood that we're going to get into a nuclear war. And none of us needs that. As I've often said before on this program, Joe Biden, for the first time since the 1980s, created a risk of war uh, 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 through his buildup, okay, of Ukraine, and through his support of Ukraine when the Russians attacked in order to defend, uh, their national interests. Uh, this created a substantial risk of nuclear war between the Russians and us for the first time in 40 years. That risk is now still there in spite of the peace talks. And then uh, support for the genocide, okay, in Israel, both by the Biden administration and the continuing support of the Trump administration, has also created a flashpoint there that increases the risk of nuclear war there, especially since the recent tightening of the alliance of Russia, okay, and Iran, which has a military aspect, even though it's not a tight kind of military alliance, but also the close relations of Iran and China are such that if we were to use a nuclear weapon in West Asia, or the Israelis were to use one, okay, in West Asia, we have a substantial risk of nuclear war there. So there's a substantial risk now of nuclear war in two areas, okay, of the world. And I'll be talking about a new risk which just appeared over the last few days as we go forward tonight, okay, with these articles. We need to tamp down the risk of nuclear war and bring it to a low level again. It's expressed by Jeffrey Sachs as uh, we need to move things back from 89 seconds, okay, to Armageddon. Yeah, we need it back to the level it was in before these new risks started, which was something like 20 minutes to Armageddon, or 30
Mm-hmm.
minutes to Armageddon. We need that kind of situation as opposed to 89 seconds to Armageddon. Sandy Degas here. He says, hi, Evelina, Steve, but Joe and Bonnie. Thank you, Sandy. It's great to see you. Uh, so, uh, have you any further comments, uh, Jeff's proposal to get rid of our bases in Asia?
Well, I think as everybody's getting more powerful, you know, that will come. I think it will come.
We have 68 bases now that are surrounding Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if we got rid of those bases, it would greatly reduce the risk of war with Iran. Which risk is growing greater? As we'll see as we go through the next article. So let us turn to that now. Okay, should I put it up or are you going to put it up, D? I guess I'm going to put it up. So, okay, so D, this is yours.
Okay, here we go. Let me make this larger. There we go. Iran's, quote, Fatteh-1 hypersonic missile is accurate, lethal, and unstoppable. And Mike Whitney, April 22nd, 2025. And here's a picture from Press TV. The range of 1,400 kilometers, capable of stealth maneuvers and passing through radar systems, equipped with solid fuel propulsion system and a second stage mobile nozzle, maneuverability in a outer of the Earth's atmosphere. The Fatteh hypersonic ballistic missile capable of evading all anti-missile systems, speed of 13 to Mach before hitting the target, 15,000 kilometers per hour, and capable of reaching very high speed.
Yep, that's very,
Wow.
very 15,000 kilometers per hour is very, very high speed. I guess
Mm-hmm.
that's something like 11,000 miles per hour.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, okay, we don't have, any anti-missiles uh, 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 that can go that fast. Okay, let's go on with the article.
In the event that the United States and Israel launch a preemptive attack on Iran, Iran is prepared to deliver a withering response that will destroy U.S. military bases, oil production facilities, critical infrastructure, and command and control centers across the Middle East. In short, Iran has the ability to set the entire region ablaze at the flip of a switch, due entirely to its prodigious missile capability, which surpasses that of either the United States or Israel.
Okay, so let me emphasize that there.
Mm-hmm.
We, the United States, do not have a hypersonic missile capability that matches the Iranians' hypersonic missile capability. We have a military disadvantage vis-a-vis Iran when it comes to these particular types, of missiles. We recently introduced, a hypersonic missile. We tested it. It was a successful test.
Mm-hmm.
It had a speed of something like, I think, Mach 5 or Mach 6. Okay, it doesn't have a speed. Mach 5 or Mach 6 is something like 3 or 4,000 miles per hour.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's only 40% of the speed, of their Fatteh-1. And it was the first one we had successfully tested. I don't even
Mm.
know if it's gone into production yet. Anyway, they have thousands of such missiles, and we have none. We have missiles, but they're all slower, and they're subject to missile defense systems like the S-400 and the S-500. We don't know yet if the Iranians have any S-500s, but they have a lot of S-400s now because the Russians sold it to them. Please go on, D.
Check out this excerpt from an article at the National Interest titled Why Iran's Fatteh-1 Hypersonic Missile is a Disaster for Israeli Security. 2 years ago, in January 2023, the Islamic Republic of Iran unveiled the Fatteh-1, the country's first hypersonic ballistic missile, at least according to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. Fatteh means conqueror in Farsi. The missile represents a significant milestone in Iran's military ambitions, signaling its intent to project power and highlights the radical, evolving nature of Iran's missile threat. In many respects, this threat is even more of a concern to Western strategists than Iran's threshold on the nuclear weapons capability. After all, even if Iran developed such weapons, it could not use them without inviting its own annihilation. But if Tehran had truly developed a hypersonic ballistic missile, everyone knows which nation it would be first to target. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow predictable parabolic trajectories, the Fattah-1 features a maneuverable re-entry vehicle, MARV, enabling it to adjust its course mid-flight, both within and outside Earth's atmosphere. This maneuverability, facilitated by a solid fuel propulsion system and a movable secondary nozzle, is central to Fattah-1's ability to evade most advanced missile defense systems, such as the Israeli Arrow, David's Sling, and Iron Dome, or even American systems like the Aegis and Patriot.
And they might have added also the THAAD system.
Mhm. In other words, the presence of Fattah-1 should give both the Americans and Israelis pause as to agitating for preventative airstrikes against suspected Iranian nuclear weapons development facilities. Why Iran's Fattah-1 hypersonic missile is a disaster for Israeli security, and that was the national interest. Repeat, the U.S. and Israel's most advanced missile defense system, excuse me, the Israeli Arrow, David's Sling, Iron Dome, Aegis, and Patriot, are useless against Iran's hypersonic missile. In other words, the Fattah-1 is unstoppable. Iran's Fattah-1 missile, 400 seconds to Israel.
And there's a video there from X, which we will not play.
Does Donald Trump know any of this? No. Trump is surrounded by, quote, yes men and neocons who only tell him what they want him to hear. He's locked inside a foreign policy bubble in which all the occupants believe in the delusional myth of, quote, American invincibility.
Okay, here I'm going to add that I'm not sure that I agree with that because Trump also has Tulsi Gabbard, okay, is the DNI. I suspect she is well aware of the capabilities of Iran, okay, in this area, and that she's probably at least tried to tell him about that.
Right.
Okay, anyway, please go on.
Trump thinks that obsolete carrier groups and B-2 stealth bombers will win wars even when his adversaries have modernized and stocked their arsenals and state-of-the-art ballistic missile systems that can elude any of their outdated air defense systems and put their payload directive on the target. Here's more from the same article. While the U.S. B-2 Spirit long-range stealth bombers could likely clobber Iranian nuclear facilities from the air, the Iranians can threaten retaliation against a long list of targets in the region: exposed U.S. bases near Iranian territory, sensitive oil refineries in neighboring Saudi Arabia, U.S. aircraft carriers in the Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, and even distant Israel. The bounty of soft targets in the region is a profound threat against which there is little reliable defense. Iran's possession of missiles like the Fatteh-1 means that Iranian retaliation is a significant threat to the region. Neither Washington nor Jerusalem they should not downplay this real threat to their safety and economic prosperity. And for all the naysayers saying that Iran's previous rounds of, quote, massive retaliation against Israel within the past year have fallen flat, it's important to understand the geopolitical context. Iran appears to have held back its most important weapons in those retaliatory strikes, and there is evidence to suggest that they pulled their punches following pressure from their primary military partner, Russia. Why has Iran been holding back? Although Russia's hold over Iran is strong, the fact of the matter is that previous Israeli strikes against Iranian targets have avoided the country's suspected nuclear weapons development facilities. These facilities represent the equivalent of the Holy Grail for the Iranian Islamist regime. If either the Israelis or the Americans struck these facilities and destroyed them, or even degraded them, and it's unlikely that even Russia's hold on Iran would dissuade the enraged Islamists from striking back against U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia targets in ways hither unimagined. Therefore, the Iranian missile threat is real. It should be avoided, if at all possible, and while the negotiations with Iran are unlikely to achieve much, air strikes are a strategic mirage. The uncertainty and instability that can unleash in an already chaotic region, excuse me, is not worth the risk. Right, Iran has patience, and plus they don't want an all-out war. They don't want the Middle East on fire.
They don't want it. Uh, okay, that's not the end of the article.
What's interesting about this article is that the author, who appears to be a strong backer of U.S. and Israel, is offering a word of caution based on his objective analysis of Iran's astonishing missing capability. He is now making a moral judgment about the impending war itself.
Yeah, right. So I'd like to make a comment about that specifically. He refers uh, uh, to the Iranians as as the Islamists, which of course is not a complimentary term. It's kind of a condemnatory term, like somehow they're religious um, fanatics, and they somehow could not be contained um, um, uh, uh, by the Russians in case of a serious attack uh, on their nuclear facilities. Okay, so in other words, he certainly doesn't care, for the Iranians.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so what he's doing is giving his version, okay, of an objective assessment. He's not making a moral judgment. He's saying that that resistance is going to be stiff, and the U.S. and Israel could lose. At this point, okay, I want to add to that. Roughly a half hour, half to three quarters of an hour before the show, I happened to encounter um, um, uh, a YouTube video that just had come out. It was completely new. It covered the Iranians' announcement of a new nuclear submarine they produced. In other words, a nuclear powered sub. So they have one of those. But even more interesting, they have a nuclear powered sub that fires, you guessed it, hypersonic missiles. I don't know if they're firing the Fatteh-1, but they have a missile that can be loaded on a nuclear powered submarine, uh, uh, hypersonic missile. That is not a capability which the United States has, as far as I know.
Hmm.
Uh, of course, if they have uh, such a missile, which they announced and which they appear to have, then they can reach Diego Garcia, which is the base for the B 2s. There was a question about whether their hypersonic missiles could reach that because the range was not actually sufficiently long, and it was thought to be a stretch to fire a hypersonic missile from the mainland of Iran, and get to Diego Garcia. But of course, if they have a nuclear submarine that cannot be detected, uh, and that gets them, let's say, within 1,000 miles of Diego Garcia, then however many hypersonic missiles can be carried by the submarine could be fired at the B 2s and the B 52s on that particular military base. And I think uh, I, um, um, I noticed in this video uh, that their sub could carry something like 16 of the hypersonic missiles. That's enough to do extreme damage to Diego Garcia and any planes that are on the ground there. So, in other words, what Iran now has is a capability to do a first strike on the B 2s and the B 52s there, and we have no way to defend against them because the air defense system we have on Diego Garcia has no capability to counter, a hypersonic missile, and the range problem will not exist, uh, for uh, their nuclear submarine. So that's a new development. It makes the Iranians much more dangerous. It even makes them a danger for the first time to the U.S. mainland, because obviously they would be able to hit our coastal cities, either the East Coast, okay, or West Coast.
Hmm.
Uh, stand off by 1,000 miles or something like that. Uh, and use their hypersonic missiles to perform a devastating attack, okay, on our cities. That's a capability they did not have before.
Hmm.
I don't think war with Iran is a good idea.
No, it's not.
Okay, please go on with the article.
All righty. He's not making a moral judgment about the impending war itself, just informing the presumed perpetrators that they will face stiff resistance and could lose. That's right, the US could lose a war with Iran. In fact, that very scenario has been gamed out many times in the past, and the outcome was always the same.
Oh, yes, but those games uh, were not assuming that they had a nuclear submarine capable of firing hypersonic missiles. That has to be added uh, to any new game. Now,
Uh,
of course, We have our nuclear submarines. Okay, we have a fleet of them. They are very capable, and they can fire missiles too. With Iran,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't fire hypersonic missiles. And the Iranians have an air defense system that is probably better than our defense. Our air defense system. Okay, at this point, certainly better than any air defense systems we have inside of West Asia. Please go.
At the very least, an outbreak of hostilities with Iran will send oil prices skyrocketing, equity prices markets tumbling, and the global economy into a death spiral. Trump hopes to minimize the damage by escalating quickly to a tactical nuclear quote bunker buster weapon that he thinks will parade the conflict to a swift end. Well, that's what he's been told. But that's not going to happen. After all, Iran has been preparing for a war with the United States for nearly 2 decades, and they are ready to go. Any attack on their nuclear facilities will put the dominoes in motion, triggering a wave after wave of ballistic missile attacks on soft and hard targets in Israel and across the Middle East. Naturally, a number of analysts think that the Fatteh-1's ability have been greatly exaggerated and are all a part of an Iranian propaganda campaign. Not surprisingly, these are the same people who want to drag the U.S. into war with Iran. It's worth noting, however, that even the conservative Washington Post provided, quote, satellite imagery from Planet Labs and expert assessments that confirmed that at least 24 Tu-32 Iranian Fattah missiles struck or landed near Israeli targets, including 20 to 32 hits on the Nevatim Air Base, 3 on Tel Nav Air Base, and 2 near Mossad headquarters, the most protected sites in the world. Damage was limited, but this indicates some missiles evaded interception. So, some missiles were intercepted. Not likely, as the author confirmed, U.S. and Israeli air defense systems are incapable of shooting down Iran's hypersonic missiles. And look at that, the Fatah.
Yeah.
By the yeah, there's a hypersonic missile.
Okay. The weight of the warhead is 1,000 kilograms. Uh, the weight of the explosives, okay, is 500 kilograms. We have to keep in mind, okay, that a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So, 1,000 kilogram is a warhead weight of 1 ton, and the weight of the explosives is, roughly 1,200 pounds. That's a powerful missile. Speed is Mach 13 plus, which means we don't really know the top speed of it. Okay, please go on.
By the way, the damage was, quote, limited because Iran did not use their more destructive warheads. It was basically a show of force. Uh, quote, shot fired over the bow of impulsive aggressors who don't grasp the magnitude of the catastrophe they're facing if they blunder ahead with their misguided strategy. Of course, coverage of the Iranian attacks has largely been concealed from the public to ensure that Trump doesn't get cold feet and refuse to launch airstrikes according to plan. In short, Israel has set a trap for Trump, and Trump appears to be walking straight into it. This is from a post at the Middle East Spectator. Iran's 2,000-kilometer range Cepha OTH radar has finally become operational, satellite imagery seems to confirm.
Yep.
The radar array is one of Iran's most advanced over-the-horizon radars, more than 1.5 kilometers in length.
Yes.
It can detect takeovers of individual aircraft or ballistic missile launches at a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, including inside the entirety of Israel. Only a handful of countries have mastered such advanced OTH radar technology, and the radar provides Iran with valuable early warning of an imminent attack. Now it's in the Middle East Spectator. So, Iran has developed advanced radar systems that can detect any enemy aircraft or ballistic missile that is launched from 2,000 kilometers away, which means that the Iranian military will have ample time to engage their defensive assets while ordering whatever first wave ballistic missile strike they have in mind.
I have one more thing to add to this particular article. Uh, the Iranians have uh, not only the Fatteh-1 missile,
Hmm.
but they also have Fatteh-2 missiles.
Hmm.
The Fatteh-2 is a hypersonic missile developed by Iran. It is part of the broader missile program, and it has been deployed, okay, in attacks such as the one against Israel in October 2024. So it was tested, okay, in that attack. Some of the missiles that hit the airbase were Fatah 2s as opposed to Fatah 1. The range of the Fatah 2 is greater than the Fatah 1. It's in kilometers, it's 1,500 kilometers. Let's see if there's anything here. Okay, there is a YouTube about the Fatah 2 out. I haven't had a chance to see the YouTube yet. Uh, it seems to have appeared only 9 hours ago. I'm not saying the missile appeared 9 hours ago. I'm saying the video on it appeared 9 hours ago. Okay, so that's very interesting. Uh, so in case the Fatah 1 was not enough capability, the Iranians now have the Fatah 2. Please go on now.
But that's just for starters. Before, as we know from the tit for tat airstrikes that took place between Israel and Iran last year, these cutting edge, multi layered air defense systems that have been integrated with Russian S 200, S 300s, Chinese systems, and other unknown elements forced Israeli aircraft to turn around and retreat during their April 19th attack.
Okay, so we know the Russians sold them some S-400 systems also, and they have probably been integrated by now as well. What we're not sure about is whether they sold them any of the S-500 systems.
Mm.
If they did, that would be pretty important because the S-500 systems were designed to knock out hypersonic missiles. Of course, we only have only a rudimentary capability in that area yet, but the S-500 systems can certainly handle anything we have, including the B-2 bombers. So please go on.
Okay. As it happens, the Israelis never got closer than 70 kilometers to Iran because they were locked onto by an unknown air defense system that spooked the Israelis, prompting a hasty retreat. As a result, the Israeli pilots were forced to fire their long-range missiles at targets that were too far away to be effective. In short, Iran's air defense system forced the Israelis to scrap their mission and return home
I scrolled down too fast.
let me see,
After inflicting only minor damage.
yeah, to the Iranian military sites. There is every reason to believe that a similar scenario will unfold if U.S. fighters and high altitude bombers are involved. Yeah, and we talked about that. I remember when that happened.
We did talk about that, yes. Okay, that graphic, of course, is uh, it shows the variety of missiles that the Iranians have in
Mm.
their arsenal. So it's just, I mean, it's simply staggering. Okay, please go on with the conclusion.
One, the Israeli air assault shows that Iranian air defense systems, which rank among the best in the world, can detect and counter stealth aircraft fight like the F-35. Iran's electronic warfare systems enhance its air defenses by disrupting enemy targeting or communication. Iran's advanced radar systems that can detect any enemy aircraft or ballistic missile from 2,000 kilometers away provide ample time for Iran's military to engage their defensive assets and order counterstrikes.
Right, so here I have to add that uh, 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 Diego Garcia is more than 2,000 kilometers away from Iran. But on the other hand, uh, the uh, the B two bombers um, only fly at a speed of I think it's 650 miles per hour. Okay. So since the island is, I think, if I recall correctly, 2,300 miles away from Iran, uh, the radar system will pick it up in plenty of time. Okay, so the Iranian defenses will have hours of warning that they are under attack or would come under attack from B 2 bombers. Uh, that is ample time for their military to engage their defensive uh, assets and order counterstrikes. And with the nuclear sub, if the nuclear sub is patrolling the waters, then the attack uh, 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 from the nuclear subs would get to Diego Garcia before the enemy aircraft are able to get to Iran. I thought that was just an interesting thought that you should hear. Please go on.
Okay. Iran's Fatteh-1 hypersonic missile, which travels at a speed of Mach 13, roughly 10,000 miles per hour, can evade any U.S. or Israeli air defense system and deliver its warhead precisely on target. Former Marine Corps intelligence officer and UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter summed it up like this: if we get into a war with Iran, we will not win. Iran has a significant ballistic missile force with an extraordinary capability. It's capable of targeting American Navy vessels, sinking American aircraft carriers. War with Iran would be suicide, and the U.S. will lose. So you look at that, all the citizens. the American citizens, the American lives, all the lives that will be lost because you have
Yes.
these neocons that want to go after Iran.
Yes. One more note here. While the Fatteh-1 uh, has a speed of Mach 13, the Fatteh-2 reaches a speed of Mach 20. So, okay, if Mach 13 is 10,000 miles per hour, then the speed, at Mach 20 is roughly 15 to 16,000 miles per hour. So that much faster.
Mm.
Uh, they are a very, very formidable enemy, easily capable of devastating retaliation against us, okay, and the Israelis. And for that matter, very capable of a surprise attack that could knock out considerable amounts, of our capability. Now, there is a deterrent to surprise attacks on their part, and that is if there's a devastating attack on Israel by them, if the attack uh, uh, doesn't get to, the Israeli, to their nuclear arsenal, then the Israelis have 250 of those weapons to use on Iran.
Mm.
And then, in uh, if that happened, it would trigger the Samson option. So there is deterrence on both sides. I think the Iranian deterrence, okay, is increasing so that the Israelis have much to fear from any attack that they might carry out against Iran. Okay, I think we also have much to fear, okay, from such an attack.
Definitely.
So let's all hope that the Iranian peace deal is um, successful and we come to a peaceful agreement with them. It is very, very important. Okay, any further comments on that one, D?
I don't really think I have more comments. This has been brought forth several times, but it seems like we said the people in Washington, they're really not filling in, letting Trump know what's going on. You have that group of neocons, and as you said, you're hoping that Tulsi Gabbard would be the one to somehow be able to get through to him.
Hmm. Yep. I think we've got some comments.
Alrighty. And I see
We'll go.
Sandy's here.
Sandy is here, yes. There's a comment, okay, from Evelina. Kamikaze, quote, heroic, unquote, things.
Hmm.
Well, the kamikaze attacks in World War II against our shipping were suicide bombings. In other words, uh, what the Japanese aircraft were doing, okay, in that case, is they were making suicide attacks, against, our shipping. So that was heroic, certainly from a particular point of view. Uh, Evelina says heroic things against uh, uh, um, the Mongols. Yes, the video I saw about this, I think that was the first of the attacks in what was it, 1271 or something like that. Uh, okay, in the first attack, something like 250 samurai held off an attack uh, against an island by thousands, okay, of ships, and 17,000, of the Mongol warriors.
Mm-hmm.
It was very heroic, okay, very impressive. I think the samurai lost about 50%, okay, of their company, but with that and the typhoons and winds, uh, they put it up, okay, they put a stop to uh, uh, the Mongol attack. But Kublai Khan became obsessive about them. Okay, and he was not a monetary sovereign, so he spent huge amounts of money attacking them the first time and then rearming for the second of his attacks. And the attacks on Japan really drained his empire. Uh, okay, and the Mongol dynasty, I think, uh, only lasted for two Khans. And a lot of the reason for that was the two attacks on Japan. They were so costly, both in terms of men and resources, okay, and money. Uh, Even it says the South Koreans calling for outing U.S. bases. Some South Koreans are. I don't think the government is at this point. If the government was, I think we'd go. Sandy says hello, shared. Earl of Laurel says hi, Steve. And Sandy says hi, Evelina, Steve, Joe, and Bonnie. Sandy says, sorry, I was taking a tick off my dog. Hello, Dolores. I miss saying hello to you. Evelina says, speaking of Iran, have you any information on the port explosion there yesterday, I think? No, I don't have any information on the port explosion. I suspect that that was an Israeli move, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Evelina says that a chemicals depot reminded me of Beirut incident a few years ago. Is the Samson option, uh, uh, you know, a nuclear war option? Yes, it is. It's the Israelis' nuclear war option. According to some accounts, they've prepared 250 or so, nuclear weapons uh, uh, um, um, to use in case of that option. Now, their doctrine says they'll only, use the nuclear weapons in case of an existential attack on Israel. If their existence is threatened, they say they will turn to the Samson option. Of course, the Samson option would be very devastating for the uh, uh, for the Iranians. But even though they have uh, uh, a lot, okay, of nuclear weapons, the issue is whether they would be able to deliver them on Iran, because the air defense of Iran is very, very good. We don't know, how many nuclear weapons would be able to get through, since the Israelis, don't have any hypersonic missiles, and the Iranian air defense will probably be able to handle most of the rest of what they have. Sandy Dick says Trump's cabinet is not that good. I think he chooses them by looks and not merit. Yeah, we all suspect that that's true. God bless you, honey. Sandy says these weapons are frightening. They are frightening. They're supposed to be frightening. they're supposed to deter the Israelis and deter the United States. And I think if the United States learns about those weapons and gives them due consideration, that we will be deterred and we will look for peaceful solutions. And that, of course, is so important. So let's go on to the third of our pieces. That piece is by Larry Johnson. He published it on April 23rd, and it's called Ukraine Peace Deal Unravels. Expert talks on Iran's uranium enrichment postponed. Congrats um, 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 to Volodymyr Zelensky for cementing his position as the champion of choosing to always do the wrong things. Before Marco Rubio and the European foreign ministers assembled in London before negotiations with the Ukrainian delegation, the Z-Man rejected any recognition by the U.S. of Crimea as Russian territory. As a result, Rubio, and Steve Witkoff, ditched the talks and were followed in short order by the other European foreign ministers. This potentially pivotal meeting turned into a complete fiasco. Zelensky, if he had any smarts, could have kept his mouth shut and said nothing about the Kellogg plan and given Mr. Witkoff time to take the proposal to Moscow, where Putin would have said, niet. That would have made the Russians the villains in this piece of kabuki theater. Instead, Zelensky gave the Russians a perfect gift by reinforcing Russians' long-standing assertion that Zelensky is not capable of actually negotiating in good faith. President Trump and Vice President Vance responded quickly to Zelensky's defiance by repeating the warning of Secretary of State from last week, Marco Rubio's warning from last week. The United States will wash its hands of the bloody mess and leave it to the Europeans and Zelensky to sort out. Meanwhile, back in Moscow, President Putin's spokesman issued a statement that signals Russia's negotiating position is going to become tougher. Peskov, speaking to a reporter from The Point, said the following: Ukraine must withdraw its troops from territories of Donbass and Novorossiya, which have become part of the Russian Federation. There will be no, quote, reset, unquote, rollback or surrender of new regions. This is not even a subject for bargaining. It is a closed topic. This marks a significant shift in the Russian claims on Ukrainian territory, i.e., Peskov used the word Novorossiya. Novorossiya, meaning New Russia, is a historical term that originated during the era of the Russian Empire. It referred to an administrative region established in 1764 after the Russian Empire conquered territories north of the Black Sea and Crimea from the Ottoman Empire and the Cossacks. The region encompassed what is now southern and eastern Ukraine, including areas such as Odessa, Kherson, the Mykolaiv area, the Dnipropetrovsk area, Zaporizhia, and parts of Crimea, and Bessarabia. And of course, by eastern Ukraine, that also includes uh, uh, the areas of Donetsk uh, and Luhansk. Uh, the Russian Empire encouraged settlement by Russians and other ethnic groups, transforming it into an important agricultural and later industrial center. During my trip to St. Petersburg last June, I was given a rubber wristband, the phrase in Russian, Donbass, the heart of Russia. The Russians are dead serious about this territory being part of Russian history. If you're wondering uh, where the territory of Bessarabia is located, it is situated between the Prut River to the west, okay, and the Dniester River to the east. Today, about two-thirds of Bessarabia lies within the modern country uh, uh, um, of um, um, Moldova, while the remaining portion is in southwestern Ukraine, including the Bujak region and a small area in the Ukrainian Chernivtsi Oblast. Its boundaries are north, extend into parts of modern day Ukraine, west, the Prut River, which is the border with respect to Romania, to the east, the Dniester River, which is the border with Ukraine. On the south, it covers the Danube River Delta and the Black Sea. So it is pretty important. Uh, if you look at the provinces here, the Poltava province here is a very famous one because there was a great victory by Peter the Great, if I recall correctly, at Poltava in 1709. Where he defeated the Poles, if I remember my Russian history correctly. Kharkov, of course, is inside of Ukraine now, but certainly the Russians consider it part, of Novorossiya. Okay, you can see Luhansk and Donetsk there. Okay, Zaporozhye, Kherson. Okay, also Dnipropetrovsk, the Mykolaiv Oblast, Odessa is down there. Okay, you can see Crimea, Sevastopol, which is the naval base the Russians have in the Black Sea. And this other area, okay, over here, okay, this is the Moldovan area. Also, it covers, Transnistria, okay, which is a geographic area that has lots of Russians in it. So the reference, okay, to um, um, to Novorossiya, okay, or to New Russia, covers almost half, of what, okay, is Ukraine today. Most probably, the Russians are looking to establish a border. Okay, they're attacking, by the way, in Sumy right now, but they're probably looking to establish a border, where Kharkiv ends, and then to incorporate also, the Dnipropetrovsk area into Russia, the Mykolaiv area into Russia, Odessa, of course, which was a city built by the Russians, by Catherine the Great. And then the southern area here, which gets, into Moldova right now. So that's a very big piece, okay, of Ukraine. It's an important industrial area in Ukraine and very important also from the agricultural point of view. So if the Russians go through with their intention, and they have the military force to do it, then at the end of that war, there would probably be a Ukraine with about half its territory detached. It would be a rump state. It would not have a port on the Black Sea. It would be landlocked unless the Russians give them the share of a port. So, going on with the article, Zelensky's refusal to negotiate and accept Russia's terms means that Ukraine is likely to lose additional territory before the war ends. I believe that Russia also will take control of Kharkiv. Oh, Poltava, he's saying. Poltava and Sumy also, he's including. Okay, and also Chernihiv. To look at those again, if you can see my cursor on the screen. Poltava, okay, is here. Sumy is there. So he thinks the Russians will want to establish a border, okay, and a border with Kiev. That is where a new border would be, and probably the border would go here, through Poltava. I might have missed something. That's even more territory, than I assumed. It would be even worse for the Ukrainians. Zelensky's refusal to negotiate and accept Russia's terms means Ukraine is likely to lose additional territory before the war ends. I believe Russia will also take control of Kharkiv, Poltava, Sumy, and Chernihiv. Russian troops already occupy portions of Sumy and Kharkiv. Yes, they do. And the Russians refer to Kharkiv, of course, as Kharkov. Okay, and that's the most common historical name. Despite the collapse of the meeting in London to discuss the Kellogg plan, Steve Witkoff reportedly is still going to Moscow to meet with President Putin. While I am sure he will brief Putin on Trump's plans regarding further support to Ukraine, Witkoff will also discuss the next step in normalizing relations with Russia and confer with Putin about the third round of talks with Iran that will take place on Saturday in Oman. Now, those talks have now taken place, and I saw a video, a very brief one, where the foreign minister of Iran was saying that the talks had really gotten down into serious detail, and that he thought it was hopeful that both sides were very serious about trying to find common ground and trying to find a way to get to an agreement. He characterized the Russians as serious. The Iranian foreign minister did. Okay, he mentioned that he was hopeful, but that the Iranians was still pursuing the negotiations with considerable skepticism because of everything, that had gone before. He also said that the missiles were off the table, in terms of the negotiations. No talk of missiles. The only talks focused on the possibility of a nuclear weapon for the Iranians and what would be done to forestall that particular possibility. I have to say, I think that in the face of the new nuclear submarine that they have, that the existence of that makes it even more important for the United States to forestall the Iranians, getting a nuclear weapon. So, uh, okay, I think uh, uh, we Americans will consider uh, getting that done as the most important thing, because it means the Iranians would not be able to threaten the United States with a nuclear weapon, being fired actually from the submarine, nuclear submarine. So if the Iranians are willing to negotiate on that and make it impossible, for them to develop a nuclear weapon, which they say they're not interested in, then getting that agreement, uh, while it represents a return to JCPOA, it's even more important now to have a return to JCPOA because that agreement made it impossible for the Iranians to have a nuclear weapon. And that impossibility is more important to us now because of the increase in the Ukrainian capability to deliver a nuclear weapon if they had one.
Mm-hmm.
So Trump will be able to tout that as a major achievement, at present. It won't be so much that the new JCPOA 2.0 will be better than the 1.0 that Trump had, thrown out. But it's more important now for Trump to have JCPOA 2.0 because of the advances in delivery capability on the part, of the Iranians. So that achievement by Trump is very, very important for the safety of the United States. And if he can get that, he'll have something to crow about. So I think it's very important to mention that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so the third round of talks was successful in that the talks were serious and in that the talks will continue. But the Iranian foreign minister also emphasized the seriousness of the talks and the fact that there were disagreements that have to be resolved.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for us all to keep that in mind. Larry goes on and says, I believe Russia's prepared to help the United States conclude a deal with Iran that will guarantee an end to any plans to build a nuclear weapon. President Putin hosted the Sultan of Oman on Monday, and the two discussed the upcoming meeting um, um, in Muscat, which is the capital of Oman, between the U.S. And Iran. The Sultan is acting as the mediator in the negotiations. And there's a picture of the Sultan of Oman, who is meeting with Putin and his Russian staff. Okay, and Putin, and Lavrov are both in that picture, as well as the Sultan. And I don't recognize who the people are. I probably should. The scheduled meeting of the nuclear experts in the U.S. and Iran was supposed to happen today, Wednesday. This is last Wednesday. Did not take place. I don't have enough information about the reason for not holding the meeting. It may mean nothing, or it could be a sign that the negotiations could be in trouble. I discussed the collapse of the Ukrainian peace deal and the upcoming talks in Oman with Danny Davis and his producer Gary today, and he links to a video covering that on YouTube. And I'm sure that was a very good discussion with Danny Davis, because Danny Davis also does a very good job as well, okay, as Larry Johnson. And any conversation they have had will be worth taking in. So, any comments, Dee? So, if not, I will go to the comments from our folks.
We're just in a dangerous situation here, and the U.S. has to wake up.
We do.
Or Trump.
Yeah, Trump has to wake up. We need peace. We need to diffuse all this. We need to end once again the substantial risk, okay, of nuclear war being triggered.
And the neocons just.
No, they don't.
I guess it's the money. I guess it's just all the money that comes in for them to take the positions they take.
Yeah, but it's so dangerous. The money's not going to help them if none of us are alive.
They don't think that far.
Well, maybe they better start thinking that far. Evelina says, makeup helps. Laugh out loud. Yeah, I suppose it does. Sandy Deck says, at the Pope's funeral, Zelensky and Trump had a one-on-one conversation alone in a large area in the Vatican. Two priests brought them chairs, and they sat alone talking to each other. You couldn't hear the conversation, but I thought it was interesting. I don't know who initiated the discussion. Evelina says, saw that too. I think Trump wanted to talk only because during the funeral, Trump looked like he was scolding Zelensky in front of President Macron. Yes, I saw that. Also, that he looked like he was scolding Zelensky, with Macron standing there. So that was interesting. So let us go then to our next piece, which is a really interesting piece by Alistair Crook. Of course, all the pieces are interesting tonight, aren't they, Dee?
Yes, they are.
Really interesting. So this is Dee's piece. So please do take over, Dee.
Okay. Quote, a Trump deal. Juggling war, easy war, and negotiations. Alistair Crook, April 24. I know what I'm doing upside down.
Upside down, yeah.
The key MAGA issue is not foreign policy, but how to structurally rebalance an economic paradigm in danger of an extinction event. Trump clearly is in the midst of an existential conflict. He has a landslide mandate, but is ringed by a resolute domestic enemy front in the form of an industrial concern infused with deep state ideology, centered primarily on preserving U.S. global power. rather than on mending of the economy. The key MAGA issue, however, is not foreign policy, but how to structurally rebalance an economic paradigm in danger of an extinction event. Trump has always been
Okay,
clear.
okay, I suppose I do want to make a comment here. Uh, it seems, as though Alistair uh, doesn't have an accurate perception of what a landslide is.
Right.
Uh, he says he has a landslide mandate. I said this before, but I'm going to say it again. It was a close election. In 1932, there was a landslide for FDR. In 1936, he had a landslide. He got everything except for something like 16 electoral votes or something like that. Uh, um, Richard Nixon had a landslide in 1972, where, if I recall correctly, he got everything except for 8, electoral votes. Uh, Ronald Reagan had a landslide in 1984. Okay, those are the landslides. Uh, uh, Trump's victory was far from a landslide. He got only 312 um, electoral votes
Hmm.
out of 538 electoral votes. That wasn't a landslide.
No.
Okay, that was a close election. Okay, please go on.
Trump has always been clear that his forms his primordial goal. His coalition of supporters are fixed on the need to revive America's industrial base so as to provide reasonably well-paid jobs to the MAGA corps. Trump may, for now, have a mandate, but extreme danger lurks. Not just the deep state and the Israeli lobby. The Yellen debt bomb is the more existential threat. It threatens Trump's support in Congress because the bomb is set to explode shortly before the 2026 midterms. New tariff revenues, Deutsche savings, and even the upcoming Gulf shakedown are all centered on getting some sort of fiscal order in place so that 9 trillion plus of short-term debt maturing imminently can be rolled over to the longer term without resort to eye-watering interest rates. It is Yellen Democrats' little tripwire for the Trump agenda.
So I need to comment, okay, on two. As I said, okay, in an earlier stream, I think in the last stream we had on Tuesday, I pointed out uh, uh, the debt bomb is not an existential threat.
No.
It's only the repayment of $9 trillion plus of short-term debt, which has to be repaid between now, and the congressional uh, elections of 2026. We roll over, okay, each year. You can tell this from the daily Treasury statement. We pay back each year something like $76 trillion worth of debt. Most of that, certainly half of it, 50% of it, is short term debt. So, in other words, every year we're turning over roughly $38 trillion of short term debt. So, turning over $9 trillion over 2 years is nothing. It's nothing. It's routine. It's done in the normal course of things. Now, it may be that our debt, it won't be so saleable anymore, because everybody is going away from the dollar. Even if that happens, though, and even though if we're not able to auction off the debt, and last time I pointed out the auctions are rigged so that they have to be successful, but even if the rigging fails, then the option is always open for the Trump administration to mint platinum coins and use the proceeds to pay down that $9 trillion plus of short-term debt. So the debt bomb is not an existential threat. Okay, it is no problem. I also want to make a comment on tariff revenues. I don't think those are going to be significant, and the reason why I don't think those are going to be significant because I think Trump is going to start running the other way on the tariffs fairly soon, and the tariff revenues are not going to be significant. I don't think that's going to happen. As for the savings of Doge, there's another article around. It's from popular information on Substack. The author is Judd Legum. Okay, is his name, and he has been tracking the Doge savings. Of course, Doge was claiming that it was going to have $2 trillion worth of savings. Then that was reduced on their website to $1 trillion of savings. Then that was further reduced to something like $250 billion of savings. Okay, and Judd's analysis of the $250 billion of savings shows that they weren't even $15 billion of real savings. All the claims by Doge are fraudulent. Even the $15 billion worth of savings is questionable. And I think it's questionable because when they calculate these savings, the savings are based on the amount of federal spending they cut off by cutting off certain kinds of activities. Okay, so Judd has gotten those savings down to $15 billion, but he hasn't considered what the costs of those cuts are. The cuts that have been made are costly in terms of revenue, in terms of macroeconomic shrinkage, of the economy. I would bet 100 to 1 that if you use dynamic scoring on the so-called savings from Doge, that the savings would be negative, that there would be no savings. The savings would be wiped out by the costs of the Doge cuts, which of course have not been assessed by Elon Musk at all, because he doesn't know how to assess the costs. He's a macroeconomic idiot, and he never even thought of assessing the savings. So anyway, I just had to make those comments.
I know, right?
Okay, please go on.
Okay.
Bonnie's laughing. Okay, I got her going with that one.
Okay. Guess I'll start the next paragraph. So far, the general context seems plain enough. Yet, on the minute of how exactly to rebalance the economy, how to manage the debt bomb, and how far Deutsch should go with its cuts, divisions in Trump's team are present. In fact, the tariff war and the China tussle bring into contention a fresh phalanx of opposition, i.e., those some on Wall Street oligarch, etc., who have prospered mightily from the golden era of free-flowing, seemingly limitless money creation, those who were enriched precisely by the policies that have made America subservient to the looming American debt knell. Yet to make matters more complex, two of the key components to Trump's mooted rebalancing and debt solution cannot be whispered, let alone said aloud. One reason is that it involves deliberately devaluing the dollar in your pocket, and secondly, many more Americans are going to lose their jobs. That is not exactly a popular sell, which is probably why the rebalance has not been well explained to the public. Trump launched the Liberation tariff shock, seemingly minded to crash start a restructuring of international trade relations as the first step towards a general realignment of the major currency values. China, however, wasn't buying into the tariff and trade restriction stuff, and matters quickly escalated. It looked for a moment as if the Trump coalition might fracture under the pressure of the conned commitment crisis in the U.S. bond market to the tariff fracas that shook confidence. The coalition, in fact, held markets subsided, but then the coalition fractured over a foreign policy issue. Trump's hope to normalize relations with Russia towards a great global reset. A major strand within the Trump coalition, apart from the MAGA populists, are the neocons and Israeli firsters. Some sort of Faustian bargain supposedly was struck by Trump at the outset through a deal that had his team heavily peopled by zealous Israeli firstists. Simply put, the breadth of coalition that Trump thought he needed to win the election and deliver an economic rebalance also included two foreign policy pillars. Firstly, the reset with Moscow, the pillar by which to end the forever wars, which was his populist base despised, and the second pillar being the neutering of Iran as a military power and source of resistance, on which both Israeli firsters and Israel insist, and with which Trump seems wholly comfortable, hence the Faustian Pact. Trump's peacemaker aspirations, no doubt, added to his electoral appeal, but they were not the real driver to his landslide. What has become evident is that these diverse agendas, foreign and domestic, are interlinked. A setback in one or the other acts as a domino, either impelling or retarding the other agenda. Put simply, Trump is dependent on wins, early wins. And even if this means pushing towards a prospective easy win without thinking through whether he possesses a second strategy and ability to achieve it. All of the Trump's three agenda objectives, it turns out, are more complicated and divisive than he perhaps expected. He and his team seemed captivated by Western embedded assumptions, such as first, that war generally happens over there, that war in the post-Cold War era is not actually war. And in any tradition, sense of full, all-out war, but is rather a limited application of overwhelming Western force against an enemy incapable of threatening us in a similar manner. Thirdly, that a war's scope and duration is decided in Washington and its deep state twin in London. So, those who talk about ending the Ukraine war through an imposed unilateral ceasefire, i.e., the faction of Waltz, Rubio, and Hegseth, led by Kellogg, seem to assume literally that the terms and timing for ending the war also can be decided in Washington and imposed on Moscow through the limited application of asymmetric pressures and threats.
Boy, is that assumption wrong.
Big time wrong.
Big time wrong.
Just as China isn't buying into the tariff and trade restriction stuff, neither is Putin buying into the ultimatum stuff. Moscow has weeks, not months, to agree a ceasefire.
No, there's no time limit, okay, for Moscow because it holds the military cards,
Yes.
okay, and it's pretty simple. If Ukraine doesn't want to give up at this point, then Moscow is just going to take what it wants, and that's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 months. Okay, there is now a big arrow attack beginning to take shape, and that's going to get rid of the Ukraine army. It's going to melt away, and that's going to be the end. I don't know if you heard it here first. I don't know if I'm first, but anyway, you heard it here. That's what I think is going to happen over the next 2 to 3 months. I think by the end of the summer, it's going to be all over. Please go on, Dee.
Putin has patiently tried to explain to Witkoff, Trump's envoy, that the American presumption that the scope and duration of any war is very much up to the West to decide simply doesn't gel with today's reality. And in companion mode, those who talk about bombing Iran, which includes Trump, seem also to assume that they can dictate the war's essential course and content too. The US and Israel perhaps can simply determine to bomb Iran with big bunker buster bombs. That's it. End of story. This is assumed to be a self-justifying and easy war, and that Iran must learn to accept that they brought this upon themselves by supporting the Palestinians and others who refuse Israeli normalization.
So this is also, in my view, a false assumption that because of the air defense system that Iran has in place, even if we attacked first, well, it's very complicated. Okay, first of all, the Iranians have uh, 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 their new radar they put in place. Okay, so if an attack from the Israel and U.S. side is starting up, they're going to have all kinds of warning, against that attack. They'll be able to retaliate against it, and their retaliation will reach Israel before the Israel and U.S. attack actually reaches them. Now the Iranians have the capability also to quickly make an attack on Diego Garcia and the B-2s as well. And if they don't catch the B-2s on the ground, then their air defense is capable of destroying the B-2s. So it's not clear that we're ever going to get a chance to deliver our bunker buster bombs. That's not an assumption that can easily be made. And even if they can deliver the bunker buster bombs, what they're going after, is the nuclear facilities. Okay, They're not going after the missile facilities, which are all over Iran. Those facilities will survive and will destroy Israel and all the American bases in West Asia. It's going to be a slaughter.
Mhm.
Please go on.
Earlian observes, quote, so we are dealing with limited horizons, limited imagination, and limited experience. But there's one other determining factor. The U.S. system is recognized to be sprawling, conflictual, and, as a result, largely impervious to outside influence, and even to reality. Bureaucratic energy is devoted almost entirely to internal struggles, which are carried out by shifting coalitions in the administration, in Congress, in pundit land, and in the media. But these struggles are, in general, about domestic power and influence, and not about the inherent merits of an issue, and thus require no actual expertise or knowledge. Quote, the system is large and complex enough that you can make a career as an quote Iran expert, say, inside and outside government without ever having visited the country or speaking the language, by simply recycling standard wisdom in a way that will attract patronage. You will be fighting battles with the other supposed experts within a very confined intellectual perimeter, where only certain conclusions are acceptable. What becomes evident is that this cultural approach, the think tank industrial complex, induces a laziness and the prevalence of hubris into Western thinking. It is assumed reportedly that Trump assumed that Xi Jinping would rush to meet with him following the imposition of tariffs to plead for a trade deal because China is suffering some economic headwinds. It is blatantly assumed by the Kellogg contingent, too, that pressure is both the necessary and sufficient condition to compel Putin to agree to a unilateral ceasefire. A ceasefire that Putin repeatedly has stated he would not accept until a political framework was first agreed. When Witkoff relays Putin's points within the Trump team discussion, he stands at a contrarian outside the licensed discourse, which insists that Russia only takes détente with an adversary seriously after it has been forced to do so by a defeat or serious setback. Iran, too, repeatedly has said that it will not be stripped naked of its conventional defenses, its allies, and its nuclear program. Iran likely has the capabilities to inflict huge damage both on U.S. forces in the region and on Israel. The Trump team is divided on strategy here too, crudely put, to negotiate or to bomb. It seems that the pendulum has swung under intense pressure from Netanyahu and the Jewish institutional leadership within the U.S. A few words can change everything. In an about face, Witkoff shifted from saying a day earlier that Washington would be satisfied with a cap on uranium and Iranian nuclear enrichment and would not require the dismantling of its nuclear facilities, to posting on his official X account that any deal would require Iran to, quote, stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program. A deal with Iran will only be completed if it is a Trump deal. Without a clear reversal on this from Trump, we are on a path to war. It is plain that Team Trump has not thought through the risk inherent to their agendas. Their initial ceasefire meeting with Russia in Riyadh, for example, was a theater of the facile. The meeting was held on the easy assumption that since Washington had determined to have an early ceasefire, that it must be.
I have to make a comment here. There would have been an early ceasefire if we had cut the supply lines to Ukraine, if we stopped helping them, if we had cut off all aid, if Trump had done that, there would have been no alternative, okay, for Ukraine except to accede to what Putin wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would have had the ceasefire. So Trump sabotaged himself
Yes, he did.
because he did not move to cut off aid, okay, from Ukraine. So the war in Ukraine, which up until then had been Biden's war, has now become Trump's war because he didn't have the guts to cut Ukraine off at the knees.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he needed to do, and he didn't do it. Please go on.
Famously, he rarely notes, quote, the Clinton administration's Bosnia policy was the product of furious power struggles between rival American NGO and human rights alumni, none of whom knew anything about the region or even had been there. It is not just that the team is uh, insouciant towards the possible consequences of war in the Middle East. They are captive to manipulated assumptions that it will be an easy war.
It's a very dangerous type of situation because of that last. It is not just that the team is insouciant towards the possible consequences of war in the Middle East. They are captive
Mm-hmm.
to manipulated assumptions that it will be, okay, an easy war. Much of our purpose tonight here was to show that it would not be an easy war, that it would be a war that we would probably lose,
Mm-hmm.
and that we are not assessing the possible consequences of with any kind of accuracy or reliability because we are making false assumptions.
Yes.
And if Trump doesn't become alive to that possibility and therefore comes to the realization that he cannot take the risk inherent, okay, in attacking Iran, then he will go the wrong way and he will attack Iran and he will lose. Okay, Israel would lose. Iran will probably lose some too. But Israel, in the face of an attack from Iran, caused by their attack on Iran, the very existence of Israel will be threatened. Colonel McGregor thinks that. Scott Ritter thinks that. Danny Davis thinks that. Most of the military people who have been watching this think that a war with Iran started by the United States and Israel would result in a victory for Iran and probably the destruction of Israel by the masses of hypersonic missiles that it's possible for Iran to deploy in case of war. On the other hand, the damage to Iran is likely to be limited unless the Israelis can get, some of their nuclear bombs through. But the Iranian air defense right now is probably one of the best in the world, and they may not be able to get anything through. It remains to be seen. Even if they can kill a couple of Iranian cities with some of their nuclear bombs, the thousands of hypersonic missiles that will devastate Israel, will destroy Israeli society. And so Israel will not continue to exist. By far, the better alternative, okay, is to make peace, 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 okay, is to make peace to sit down with the Palestinians to finally negotiate a viable solution with two states occupying that particular land. That can still be done if they sit down and talk and the proper guarantees are in place. And even though it's thought that two-state solution has become more and more practical as time actually goes on, it is the only solution that can put a stop to further slaughter, in that area. It is the practical solution because it's the only solution that is going to bring peace. So, any comments, Dee?
We always come to the same conclusion. They're living on a different planet in Washington, D.C. With their think tanks and everything else, it's like this little clique.
In Washington, D.C., they live inside of the bubble of Washington, D.C. I don't think it's a different planet, but it's a bubble that makes it look like we have a different planet. They only talk to each other, they only listen to each other. They don't pay attention to contrary evidence, and they don't properly assess the risks that we are facing in foreign policy. And Trump is particularly susceptible to that because he surrounds himself with people who will tell him what he wants to hear.
Exactly.
I think the only person that he talks to on foreign policy who is likely to be honest with him is Tulsi Gabbard. And her voice will probably be drowned out by all of the other Zionists who are surrounding him. I think Tulsi is also a Zionist, but I don't think that her favoritism towards Israel will cloud her judgment if she has access to the facts. And I think she will look for the facts. She will seek the facts. If anybody is watching Colonel McGregor's stream or Scott Ritter's stream or Danny Davis's stream or the streams of other military people who are talking about the military situation in West Asia, if anybody in the administration is watching those things, it's she. But I'm afraid that she might be the only one. So, have you any more comments on it, Dee?
Not really. It's just, like I said, we need someone pretty much to light a firecracker in there.
Yeah. We need someone to wake them up. I mean, they need to be woke. They need to be woke by the facts. So, we have one final piece to go through. That's not going to be a chore because it's a piece by Pepe Escobar. It's called China, Hong Kong, and the Art of Blinking. Rather than the art of the deal, the art of blinking. And there's a picture of Xi Jinping. A broken vase is in the middle. I guess it's the broken vase of trade relations. And on the other side, on the right-hand side of the picture, on our right-hand side of the picture, is Donald Trump. And the caption is Captain Chaos definitely does not have the cards, which, as even South Pacific penguins know, are all made in China. In other words, we no longer manufacture playing cards here. They manufacture the playing cards in China. This is by Pepe Escobar. It's dated April 25th, 2025, which was yesterday, as you all know. So, Shanghai and Hong Kong. So, predictably, Captain Chaos did blink first, as much as he and his sprawling media circus could not possibly admit it. It all started with tariff exemptions, quote unquote, from smartphones and computers to auto parts on products imported from China. Then it veered towards carefully manufactured leaks, implying tariffs, quote, could, unquote, be reduced to a range between 50% and 65%, and finally a terse admission that if there's no deal, a quote tariff number will be unilaterally set. China's Ministry of Commerce was unforgiving. Quote, trying to trade away others' interests for temporary gains is like bargaining with a tiger for its skin. It will only backfire, unquote. Well, that's a very visual statement. Bargaining with a tiger for its skin, it will only backfire. And it got fiercer. The ministry the ministry uh, um, uh, the ministry was adamant that any Trump 2.0 claims of any progress on bilateral talks have, quote, no factual basis, unquote, de facto, but depicting the U.S. president as a purveyor of fake news, which we all know that indeed he is. That's a completely accurate statement by Pepe, especially in that case, but in most other cases too. Trump talks reality only once a day, like a broken clock. Tigers, tigers, burning bright. The image does not recall poetry superstar William Blake, but Mao's legendary depiction of the U.S. empire as a, quote, paper tiger, unquote, a flashback that struck me over and over again last week in Shanghai. If the U.S. empire was a paper tiger already in the 1960s, the Chinese argue, imagine now. I guess what I have to say about that is I don't think the U.S. empire was a paper tiger during the 1960s. But I do think the U.S. empire is a paper tiger now, I'm afraid. And the pain will increase not only for the paper tiger, any dodgy deals made by foreign vassal pussycat governments at the expense of Chinese interests simply will not be tolerated by Beijing. Last week in Shanghai, I was reminded over and over again, Pepe says, by academics and business people that the weaponized Trump tariff tizzy, TTT, goes way beyond China. It is a desperate offense ordered by the U.S. ruling classes against a peer competitor that scares the hell out of them. The best Chinese analytical minds know exactly what's going on in Washington. Take, for instance, this essay, originally published by the influential Cultural Horizon magazine, breaking down the triangular power structure of Trump 2.0. And he links to the article, which I have not read. Magazine breaking down the triangular power structure of Trump 2.0. We have all power, Trump forming a super establishment, Silicon Valley money politics represented by Elon Musk, and the new right-wing elite represented by VP J.D. Vance. And result, Okay, end result, okay, a quote, governance system that is almost parallel to the federal government. I'm not sure that I agree with that particular visualization. I don't know why it would be almost parallel to the federal government. It might be an alternative to the federal government, but of course, the federal government includes its federal structure. And I don't know that Vance represents the federal structure in any systematic way. I think we're finding that out now as the federal structure becomes more and more important in resisting Trump. Anyway, to go on, the European Chihuahuas are the Baltics, I guess the Baltics and other small states of Eastern Europe, caught in the crossfire of Trump 2.0, simply incapable of such synthetic and precise conceptualization. Next section is called Paper Tiger Meets the Fiery Dragon. What a deep dive in Shanghai has revealed is that China has been handed over a rare Earth-like opportunity by Trump 2.0 to consolidate its strategic initiative, solidifying the role of leader of the global South slash the global majority, at the same time carefully managing the risk of a new Cold War. Call it a Sun Tzu move that may paralyze the empire in its tracks. Professor Zhang Weiwei, with whom I had the pleasure to share a seminar in Shanghai on the Russian-China strategic partnership, would agree. Excuse me a second while I take a couple of pills. Okay. China is on the move across the spectrum. Chinese Premier Li Qiang sent a letter to Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba urging a joint drive right now to counteract the tariff dementia. President Xi's top message in his Southeast Asia tour last week was to stand up against, quote, unilateral bullying, unquote. She deftly moved, between the country, okay, of Malaysia, current rotating chair, okay, of ASEAN, always avoiding taking sides, and the Vietnam with its, quote, bamboo diplomacy, always hedging between the U.S. and China. She said to Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim directly, quote, we must safeguard the bright prospects of our Asian family, unquote. Translation, let's create an exclusive sphere of influence close to the, quote, community of shared destiny, unquote, but that does not include outside powers such as the United States. In parallel, there has been a strong debate from Shanghai to Hong Kong that transcends the role of China as the world's factory. What matters now is how to redirect some of China's astonishing manufacturing capacity towards the domestic market. Of course, there are problems, such as the lack of purchasing power among scores of Chinese domestic consumers, even as the bulk of national China income is directed to fixed asset investments. A great deal of China's rural elderly population survives on a monthly pension of roughly $30 a month, and the hourly rate for the gig economy has stagnated at around $4. Wow. Meanwhile, in the several high-tech fronts, China just built the fastest high-speed train on the planet, 400 kilometers per hour. 400 kilometers per hour. I thought it was 400 miles per hour. 400 kilometers per hour is what? 60%. That's 240 miles per hour. Soon to run between Beijing and Shanghai. China's already receiving orders for the C919 commercial wide-bodied airliner. China has come up with the world's first thorium power nuclear uh, uh, reactor. Translation: unlimited, cheap, and clean energy is at hand. I've read somewhere that the thorium existing in China uh, would provide 60,000 years of energy for China if they exploited it. The mafia way of doing business, Hong Kong is a very special case. HSBC executives, for instance, worry about a possible decoupling between U.S. and China and wonder whether Hong Kong may survive without U.S. trade. Yes, it can. The U.S. is Hong Kong's third largest trade partner, yet Hong Kong's export and import to the U.S. are only 6.5% of GDP and 4% of GDP, respectively. And it's not of GDP, sorry, 6.5% and 4% respectively of its total global exports and imports, including transshipment of goods back and forth from the mainland. HK is a world-class logistics hub and free port. So long as Trump 2.0 does not forbid trade with Hong Kong, well, anything can happen. Imports should not be affected. Anyway, most of what HK exports, electronics, luxury goods, clothes, toys, can easily find alternative markets in Southeast Asia and West Asia and Europe. The crucial point is that over half of Hong Kong trade is with the mainland. And the key fact is that China can easily survive without U.S. trade. Beijing has been carefully preparing for it since Trump 1.0. Thank you, Trump, for warning the Chinese, for getting them ready so they could do it without us. That was brilliant. From Shanghai to Hong Kong, the best analytical minds are in tune with the inestimable Michael Hudson, who has emphasized over and over again how, quote, the United States is the only country in the world that has weaponized its foreign trade, weaponized its foreign currency, the dollar, also weaponized the international financial system, and treated every economic relationship in an adversarial way to weaponize it, unquote. A self-confident, high-tech, savvy China, from academics and business people to Xiaolong Bao and pulled noodles vendors, graphically understands that the empire of chaos in its drive to isolate, quote unquote, China is only isolating itself, and its chihuahuas. Moreover, it's such a joy to see Michael Hudson also referring to the same paper tiger syndrome that I witnessed in Shanghai these past few days. Quote, well, America has become a paper tiger financially today. Doesn't really have anything to offer except the threat of tariffs, the threat of suddenly disrupting all the trade patterns that had been put in place over the last few decades, unquote. In Shanghai, I heard serial, implacable dismissals of the so-called the Mirren Plan, quote unquote, as in the paper published last November by Trump's economic advisor, quote, restructuring the global trading system, unquote. Stephen Mirren is the brain behind the Mar-a-Lago Accord, whose rationale is to weaken the U.S. dollar by forcing major economies from China to Japan and the UAE to sell U.S. dollar assets and swap short-term U.S. treasuries for 100-year bonds with zero interest. Mirren's brilliant idea boils down to nations having only two options: meekly accept these U.S. tariffs without any retaliation, one, and two, write checks to the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury. Now, already we see nobody is doing that because they're neither writing checks to the U.S. Treasury nor are they meekly accepting the tariffs. Everybody's retaliating all over the place, even Canada and Mexico.
What's the U.S. doing to rebuild the U.S.?
Very little at this point. As we know from his first term, that has not been Trump's strong point. Even though he talks about, bringing industry back, he's not willing to use the government to do that through subsidies and to do it through a federal job guarantee. He has no concept of anything except uh, business elites, oligarchs, dealing with each other and somehow providing jobs for people through those kinds of deals. He doesn't understand the incentives are not there without an active government sector seeding the situation for the business elites to profit from. Zhao Shijun, co-dean of the China Capital Market Research Institute at Renmin University, destroyed the scheme succinctly. Transferring money to the U.S. Treasury like this is like, quote, collecting protection money on the streets, unquote. Translation: that's the mafia way, quote, a thuggish and domineering act, merely dressed up with the lofty justification of providing uh, 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 public goods, unquote. What Trump has to recognize is that he can't use the mafia way because we don't have the armed force to enforce that. I don't know whether we ever did, but certainly in the present economic situation, we can't even force the Houthis into submission. We can't even enforce a small nation of 24 million people, one of the poorest nations on earth. We cannot force them to do our will. Meanwhile, in the grand chessboard, Beijing keeps working steadily, side by side with Russia, towards a Eurasian-wide security architecture anchored on a balance of powers. It's all about the new Primakov triangle: RIC, Russia, Iran, and China. Top BRICS members, Russia and China, will not allow the empire to attack fellow BRICS member Iran, and support comes in more ways than one. Example: more imperial energy sanctions on Iran. China will increase imports via Malaysia and invest even more in Iran's infrastructure in tandem with Russia in respect to the International North-South Transportation Corridor, INSTC, as well as the Belt and Road Initiative. By the way, I just saw a news item the other day as well that the capability now exists for Iran to deliver its oil to China by rail, by high-speed rail transportation. They no longer will even have to use the oceans, to do it. So if there's a war and Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz, it will still be capable of delivering its oil to China. We won't even have the capability to block that. In a nutshell, Captain Chaos, this is the final sentence of this fine article by Pepe. In a nutshell, Captain Chaos definitely does not have the cards, which, as even the South Pacific penguins know, are all made in China. This was republished from Strategic Culture Foundation by permission of the author or representative. I thought that was a brilliant piece, by the way. Absolutely brilliant, pulling together so many different threads, extremely analytical, extremely well written, extremely well put, and the analysis was brilliant. Dee, any comments?
It was great. Just, Pepe, I just love the way he writes. And I don't know what else to add.
Okay, you might want to make your volume a little louder. You're seeming a little quiet at this point.
Okay, how's the sound now?
Better, much better.
I don't think I have anything to add to Pepe.
Okay, so there was a comment from Evelina. A number of comments actually from Evelina. Well, Sandy said, "Oh boy," at 10:43 in relation to something, but that was almost an hour ago now. Evelina said at 11:15, "Seems like both Zelensky, along with the Europeans and Netanyahu, will do what they want. Both are reckless and face an existential problem. My worry is that Trump will eventually lose patience and let it all happen far from home." Evelina says he's not interested in saving the world. I agree, but he should be interested in saving himself. Sandy says, no, he's not. He wants to be the king. I don't think that's going very well for him either. I know he's still trying and we have serious threats, but I think the whole nation is up in arms now, and he's going to find, I believe, that he won't be the king. I think the courts are against him. I think the Congress is shifting. The Republicans themselves are losing patience. And he's in danger of them switching sides. If 20 of them switch sides in the Senate, and maybe 10 switch sides in the House, he can be impeached and convicted, and J.D. Vance, will be the president. And I don't believe the army is going to support Trump. I don't believe any of the military will support him, because I don't think the Defense Department has a great deal of respect for him personally, or for the person he selected to be the Secretary of Defense. I think the military knows that he's incompetent, and they don't want to be led by him.
No.
And especially if he has a failure in West Asia, that failure will fall on his particular shoulders. He won't have anybody to blame for that except himself. Sandy Degg says it took Trump less than 100 days to screw up everything. And I don't think the worm is turning. It will be even more of a screw up in the next 100 days. Evelina says he'll continue to send money and arms to Israel, but will not go along with Israel's war with Iran. The good thing is Israel will not go it alone. As far as Ukraine, Trump will probably let the Russians take care of it. I believe he will. That's not going to be popular with a lot of Americans, because most Americans are still delusional when it comes to Ukraine. I mean, you have the very people opposing Trump so vigorously talking about, defending democracy here. And then when they start talking about foreign policy, they characterize the nation of Ukraine as a democracy. It's been a one-party state now for some years. There is no defense. Zelensky has the power of a dictator. and there are neo-Nazis still in the regime. I know there are a lot of people who swear right now. Timothy Snyder is in front of the Congress, swearing, that the neo-Nazis are not there. But okay, if they're not there, why is Zelensky uh, uh, um, so afraid of having a peace agreement? I think he's still afraid of getting his throat cut. They are there. They're the ones who are going to cut his throat. Anyway, Netanyahu and Zelensky will continue to provoke. Trump will not get in their way. Sandy says Trump ruins everything he touches. Well, if he lets the Russians have their way inside of Ukraine, he simply steps back, he cuts off aid to Ukraine, then that will bring peace to Ukraine, and that will be a good result. And if he's not going to join Israel, in attacking Iran, then Israel is not going to go it alone, and that means that the axis of resistance will continue to function and get stronger. And the end of that road is either the total destruction of Israel, okay, or finally a new regime in Israel getting in power and negotiating some solution that creates a Palestinian state and a sharing of Palestine, between the two peoples. And a major adjustment in Israeli thinking, of course, so that it abandons the silly idea, of Greater Israel, and accepts the reality of things inside of West Asia. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure Trump is going to end up ruining things, in West Asia. He does seem to have the vague idea that he needs peace with Russia. And he does perhaps seem to have the vague idea that maybe he shouldn't be fighting Iran. And if he implements those two vague ideas, then that might actually facilitate solutions in both places and remove the risk, of nuclear war. Of course, I'm looking on the bright side now. He could just as easily go the other way. He's very unpredictable. And that's why the situation is so scary right now. I think we've caught up to all the comments. Have you any further notions that you'd like to add, Dee?
Not really. It's just every week. It's just so much every week, and as we know, Trump is loud about everything.
Yep, he's very loud. He certainly is.
And as Sandy said, the problem is Trump does not think. Right, he blabs out stuff, and there's all the talk about what he blabbed, and then there's all the people around him that are controlling the narrative. I mean, things could have been solved already with Iran when Witkoff came back, but then, the people around Trump, have an agenda.
They do. The people around him have an agenda. And he has vague notions, I think, as opposed to an agenda. But on the other hand, his notions may crystallize. We can always hope for that.
Right, and he's like in one of the articles we read how he has the Israeli firsters. They're all there. Money was given, the votes given for all those Israeli firsters. Even though he wants peace, but they're all pushing war. I mean, they're living in a in a bubble themselves. I mean, they're thinking they could just go in and, wow, we're just gonna, blow up Iran and we're superior and we're gonna roll in the end times, and it's just complete delusion.
Right. Yeah, I think on that note, we may want to say goodnight.
I think so too. Good night, Bonnie. Good night, everybody.
Okay, we've got 48 folks here now. I think that's pretty good.
I think so too.
Thank you, Sandy, for coming. I'm sure the 48 folks have a lot to do with your sharing and Dee's.
Sandy surpasses me. She
So,
has connections to a lot of groups she can get in.
so thank you both very, very much for boosting attendance tonight. Let's hope this stream gets a lot of attention in the aftermarket. I think it's a real important stream.
I think so too.
Yeah. So, Evelina, good night. Evelina says, I think he has vague notions, like Dr. Joe said. Yeah,
Hmm.
vague notions are right. Sandy says, have a great night, everyone, and you're welcome. And she leaves a heart. Well, thank you, Sandy.
Good night, everyone.
And thank you, Dee.
Yes, we'll see you again. What,
And
Tuesday night?
you. Yes, you'll see me again on Tuesday night. Right.
Okay.
For a moment there, we had 49 people. Just for
Just for a moment in time.
yeah, someone probably came on and discovered we were about to sign off, so they immediately signed up. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night.
I'm going to end it here.